Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, July 22nd. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families webinar series. This is webinar number 6, Building Partnerships. This session is facilitated by Mary Ann Kane-Bresci, Director of Family Supports for DDA. Cindi Kauffman, SEEK's Director of Strategic Planning, is her guest. And before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are 2 options for listening to the webinar by computer and smartphone. There is a handout for this webinar which we have uploaded, and you can also email me if you didn't get it. We will be recording the webinar, and if we have time at the end, we'll take questions directly related to the webinar. If you have a question regarding services and supports, please contact your local regional office. If you have questions related to Appendix K, please submit them to this email, dda.toolkitinfo@maryland.gov. In addition, we're interested in highlighting how people with disabilities and their families are supporting and caring for one another during this pandemic throughout this webinar series. If you're interested in sharing your story, please contact Mary Ann Kane-Bresci directly at mary.kane-bresci@maryland.gov or me, donna.will@maryland.gov. And now I'd like to introduce Mary Ann Kane-Bresci. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Donna. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome you on behalf of the Maryland Community Practice for Supporting Families to our webinar today on building partnerships. I'd like to welcome Cindi Kauffman, which I'll introduce formally in a few moments. She's the Director of Strategic Operations at SEEK. Thank you, Cindi, for sharing your time, expertise, and being with us today. Many of you already know me, Mary Ann Kane-Bresci, and you know that my husband and I are the parents of 4 adult children. Our youngest, Maggie, has multiple disabilities and is the reason for me entering the field. I've worked in the field of disability for well over 20 years now in a variety of capacities, and now I'm fortunate to be with the Maryland Developmental Disability Administration as their Director of Family Supports. Throughout this series, we have the goal is to support families, and we've been wanting to bring individuals with developmental disabilities, their families, and others together in order to connect and share important information and ideas in an effort to support one another as we make our way through this pandemic and beyond. We've discussed and will continue to discuss a variety of topics. We want to address concerns individuals and families are having and have faced related to COVID-19 and in life in general. Some of the topics we've already have covered have been trauma-informed care, transition. We've even have hosted a Q&A webinar. And of course, we've done all of this with the help of our special guests and subject matter experts. And again, and of course, we're doing all of this through the lens of charting the life course framework. So, charting life course framework, what is it? Many of you are familiar, but for those of you who aren't, charting the life course is a set of universal principles and tools. Its fundamental principle states that all people have the right to live, love, work, play, learn, and pursue their aspirations in the community. It was developed out of the University of Missouri, Kansas City, their Institute for Human Development and Family to Family program. It was developed by families for individuals with disabilities and other families caring for their family members with IDD. The goal is to help people. Their goal was to help people with developmental disabilities and families create a vision for a good life. Think about what they need to know and do. Think about and learn how to navigate or develop supports and resources, and finally to really discover what it's going to take to live the life of their choosing and to be able to do it. So that said, charting a life course, while we use it while working with families and individuals, it also, the principles inform all of the work of the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families. In addition, DDA informs the work of the Developmental Disability Administration and many other state agencies and community partners as we work together to create regulation, policy, programs, and practice to better support people with developmental disabilities and their families across the lifespan. Normally, I would focus on a particular principle and or slide, but today I'm going to do something a little different. I want to talk about why families, why are we concerned about families? I'd like to say this: families, biological, chosen, or otherwise, are the backbone of our service delivery system. Generally speaking, families are in it for the long haul. They have been caring for and about their family members since day one and will more than likely continue to do so across their lifespan, even though their roles and their capacity to do so may and will change. Today, families are a tremendous source of support and resource for the person, obviously, in that they are often caregivers, they provide financial support, they often are the conduit by which, not the conduit, I'm sorry, that's not the word, they are how the person with disabilities connects to their community, develops relationships, develop networks. Families often are the sole entity that provides opportunities for the person with disabilities, etc. But in addition to supporting the individual, their family member, families are a tremendous support and a resource, and they can be for staff, whether it's day, employment, or residential. They are a tremendous resource potentially to the provider and to systems at large in terms of being able to bring their experience and offer their perspective so that systems and providers can do things differently and hopefully better. Let's just look at the numbers for a moment. So these are national numbers. So in the United States, we've got close to 4.7 million people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. 89% of these folks are living in their homes and are supported by family. And again, I just like to take a moment to just qualify family. I alluded to it, biological, chosen, or otherwise. For us, we recognize that not all people with developmental disabilities have their biological family intact or are necessarily connected to them. And so we recognize for us, as we speak about family, those are family can be any configuration, but those people that care for the person or the person has identified as someone that they care about. It could be friend, it could be former staff, it could be a former educator, so forth and so on. That said, we've got 89% of all folks living in homes and or in their own homes and are supported by family, with only 11% receiving or being supported in residential services. And but what I'd like to add about this too, as a family member whose daughter is supported in residential services, we are very active in her care and in her life and do provide support. We're definitely a part of that team and really support her good quality of life. And I'd like to believe we support those folks, her staff, amazing women that support her in their efforts to do so. So as we recognize that the role that families play, just the sheer numbers, right, and supporting people with disabilities, as a system, we want to think about how we can best support them so that they are able to continue to be part of this. And we want to do it in such a way, we want to support families with all their complexity and diversity in ways that maximize their capacity, strengths, and unique abilities so that they can best support, nurture, and facilitate the achievement of self-determination, interdependence, productivity, integration, and inclusion in all facets of community life. And we want to do this. So there's something else I want to say about this. So what's really important with charting a life course We are concerned with supporting the family, absolutely, because we are the backbone of the service delivery system, but in no way, and particularly for those folks who have disability, are we saying that the family is the critical piece here, or is the end game. The focus here isn't to supplant the individual. The goal is to support families so that they can best support their family member, really to truly live their best life, their good life. That is the goal. And we want to do this from a systems perspective. We want to do this utilizing integrated services and supports, recognizing that the person, recognizing the person within the context of family and community. Integrated supports, by that we mean we want to be able to serve the person when, where, and how he or she need to be supported. We want to move from the traditional services if they don't meet the person's need. Our goal is to meet the person's need as well as the family's need, so that again, he or she really is living their best life. Seek, represented by Cindi here today, is an agency, is one of many agencies. We're fortunate in Maryland. There are many agencies who've really begun to really recognize the role of family and the need to partner with family in order to best support the people that Seek or providers have agreed to support. And I'm thrilled today that we have Cindi here with us, and I'd like to introduce you to her. And with that, Cindi is, as I mentioned earlier, is the Director of Strategic Planning with Seek. Cindi also happens to be a sibling. Her two sisters, unfortunately, passed away in childhood of complications related to their severe disabilities. Cindi has worked in the field of disabilities for more than 40 years, both nationally and internationally, and feels very lucky to have worked in so many different roles, beginning in direct services for 10 years, then later as a case manager and service coordinator. In addition, she served the state of Maryland in two different times as a regional director and associate director of Maryland's University Affiliated Program, now the Maryland University Center of Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, and as vice president of the Council on Quality and Leadership. Cindi has filled other roles and has gained valuable experiences during these years, and currently serves as the Director for Strategic Operations at Seek in Montgomery County. Welcome, Cindi. Cindi, can you hear me?
I muted myself to be kind to you when I was sneezing.
Oh, okay. So I'm so thrilled to have you and to be able to share the information you want to share with all these other folks here today. But let me just start by asking you, what are the key points that you want to share with folks today?
Probably most important is to build on what you said about the importance of working with families of the people that providers support. I also want to touch on helping families understand the organization's workforce and working challenges, both right now and ongoing. Hopefully I'll get to take a few minutes talking about our agencies, how we think about the future and where we need to go. And importantly, we want to talk about what families have taught us about the need for partnering and for partnerships. And then to touch on a few ideas or tools that we believe have helped us strengthen our relationship with families.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's begin with your first point. Why is it important to partner with families of, with the people that you support?
Yeah. Probably start with, and I think you mentioned it, it's personal as well as professional. Just like to mention that, yes, I had two siblings that passed away when I was still a child, but I have never forgotten, and my mother never lets me forget what she went through. She had, I'd say my sister Deborah in particular, was very involved with multiple disabilities, and my mom looked everywhere just trying to get any kind of help even medical help, any kind of support. And every step along the way at that time was, well, you've got to institutionalize her. Finally, when she was about 4, almost 5 years old, her pediatrician, our family doctor at that time, said, sorry, Lillian, I will not provide care for her anymore unless you put her in an institution. So at that point, my mom and dad kind of gave up and did place her in an institution. I remember going there and having the most beautiful picnics on the grounds out there, beautiful lawns, but I would not go in the building. The building scared me. It was a lot of dark wood. The other thing I remember is 6 months after my sister was there, she passed away. That is, yeah, it remains hard after all these years. But it also evidently was the seed and the commitment to there is more that families need. They need something that isn't there. So that's been my career for over 40 years. And as an intern, my senior year of college, I lived in a group home and stayed there for some time, and hopefully have kept learning and I kept appreciating the important part that families play. Another reason that it's so important in working with families is if you recognize the workforce challenges today, the workforce shortages. The last numbers I heard about 6 months ago is there were about 1 million openings for direct support workers in this country. And there were about just under 900,000 people to fill those nearly million. Million and a half, I'm sorry, it was 1.8 million. So there was about half the availability of staff. We also know that COVID-19 has changed the way we do business, but it's not all been challenges, that we've recognized some tremendous opportunities, and it's especially noticing those opportunities in working with families. We also know, as Mary Ann said very clearly, families really remain an untapped and unsupported resource. Whether it's obviously money, they certainly know people, the people that we support. They know people that are involved in their lives, that may be the potential for jobs, for resources, and the families have ideas that we as staff have never even thought of. And basically the bottom line is, I guess it makes sense, just makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. Can you talk a little bit about the family dilemmas?
Yes. And we recognize that adult children need those connections to families. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, that we've had years of being in a broken system, that families have learned very well to mistrust providers for a lot of good reasons and some probably not good reasons. We recognize that the dilemmas of transitions, the lifespan of families and the lifespan of people, there's a lack of certainty. I just get good at the school system, and the next thing you know, my son or daughter is growing out of that system, and now what? Nobody prepared me for what they're going into. Creates a lot of stress. Some of the dilemmas are that from a young age, parents often wonder, we just touched on this in a conversation, I'm probably not going to outlive my children. What happens when I'm gone? And some families begin to have hope and thinking that, you know what, things will continue to get better. We need to keep hope.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Cindi, what are some of the challenges that you've begun to identify some of them, but as an agency, your challenges and how in your partnership with families might that partnership help you, assist you to address some of those challenges?
Okay, sure. As we know, the pandemic has highlighted the weaknesses in our infrastructure, but it goes well beyond a workforce crisis, and it's leading us to look at what's the future. Can we continue to do business the way we are and succeed? Basically, what we believe is that there's a whole paradigm shift that needs to take place, and it's time to do so. The crisis has prompted that for us. We're asking fewer direct support workers to do more. We're asking them to do them in different ways. We're asking them to go from facilities to home and community settings, and where they had a lot of colleagues and support built right in, they're now out there alone, having to make decisions and be sophisticated professionals on their own. As providers, we can focus on not having enough money from our public system. We can focus on not having the right staff, and we can continue to do more of the same and having the same complaints. Or we can recognize that we need to do things differently. We believe the providers need to disrupt what we currently do. We can't keep doing the same things. We need to see technology as a viable way to look at the future and with greater uses. We need to do much better jobs of finding, developing, and coordinating resources. In Maryland, we're very lucky, a lot of resources. They're not easy to find. They're even more difficult to access. So we have to help with that. We have to negotiate more flexible delivering and using those services. We need to figure out how to fill gaps. Some of the same gaps have existed for many, many years. And we need to partner with families to build those needed supports and resources, again, along the lifespan. It's not okay for just as children are in school. It's not okay for just when they hit 20 and we look at project searches or a job or something else. We've got to pay attention to the lifespan of both the person and the family from which they come.
Absolutely, absolutely. Was there a little story you wanted to talk about your experience in
There was.
PA?
I was a little worried about time. So.
No, I think we're good. I think we have some time. Go ahead.
Okay. Goes back quite a few years, close to 40, probably 40 or a little bit more. I started in this field working in rural Pennsylvania. And some of you may know in Appalachian areas of things called hollows or hollers. And some of my work at times was in these hollows where a family or a person kind of owned that property and brought people in that were generally impoverished, probably very much uneducated, and also normally had nowhere else to go, and in fact appeared to be owned by that person that owned that property as well. I did a lot of work there, and the community health nurse and me, as a case manager and infant stimulation coordinator, were it. And so what we found was very often we had to take kids 2 and 3 hours to Pittsburgh, and if we were lucky, we got there once a year to see a specialist. So what we were faced with doing, with very little knowledge, is with the mom, dad, and the health nurse and me, we had to suck up everything that specialist was saying. Could have been a physical therapist, speech therapist, doc, whomever, and then go back, and for the rest of that year, we were it. So if that child got therapy, it was dependent on the family or dependent on us. Scary to say that we took on that liability, but that was it. So things have changed since then.
Yeah.
But it helped me to recognize I can't do my job without working it out with the families.
Absolutely.
So that's my story.
Wonderful, wonderful, poignant story. Thank you. Well, given all that you've just talked about and considering these challenges, where do you seek, or what, where do you seek? Where do you seek? What is seek? Yeah, and I didn't mean to be, not intentional. No. What is seeking for the future in terms of identifying what are the focus areas? What kinds of things do you want to build on? And what do you think are important for folks with disability, the kinds of services and supports they might need?
Okay. Based on what I said a couple minutes ago about what I believe and what we believe providers are facing and families and our challenges for the future, as well as our vision and our philosophy that we don't ever want to lose sight of, is seek at this time in doing, we focus a lot of our time in strategic thinking and looking forward. And where do we need to be over the next decade? And we know right now that there are 4 areas that we need to look at. One is our workforce. I mentioned that. We talked about the need for not just more of a workforce, but a different workforce. People that can think independently, that can build relationships, that can accept doing more with technology. The second area that we know we need to focus on is sometimes I hear colleagues say, well, if the state doesn't pay for it, I can't do it. And we know that that's never going to be enough. It's not up to public dollars to fund people's lives. We have to look at the financial diversity so that we're not dependent on one source to fund everything we can or cannot do. Navigation and planning is a concept that we're focusing on. What I mentioned a couple minutes ago about there are so many resources in Maryland, even in the rural areas, there are probably more exists than people understand or can find. And our responsibility, both internally and externally, is to help people we support and families not just find the resources, but helping them negotiate the circuitous paths that go there. And then a big focus also is on partnerships, and not just with families. We recognize that internally, if I offered this service, this is where my little kingdom was, you know, and then, oh, you offered a different one. We need to change that. We need to blow it up. We all need to partner together internal to seek. We also need to partner externally with businesses, with resources. I shouldn't ask staff to get good at teaching art to someone when in fact there are art teachers out there that work with everybody, that maybe we can find them and hook people up. It creates a little more of a sense of belonging, of the stuff that we believe in. And then the other piece of partnerships is partnering with families to strengthen the lifelong supports to people that we think is so critical. And we think it's in the success of working with people with disabilities over the long haul. So that's.
I absolutely think it's true. Cindi, just for the audience sake, can you, so that they have a context in terms of the kinds of services you provide, SEEK provides, can you just describe them very briefly, just so folks know that, how.
If you and we'll talk a couple minutes more about a little bit later about some of the activities, but the services we provide nothing in a facility. So we do supported living. Which for many people would mean like residential supports, but it would be supports where the person either lives with their family or wants to move into their own place and is living on their own. We provide day supports, again, only in the community. We haven't, I've been with SEEK for almost 8 years, and we haven't had any buildings in that period of time other than our office, which is also going more remote and in the community. And if some of you know of Project Search, which is a year program after the transition from high school, that's sort of an internship type of setting, and then supported employment or employment services in the way of helping to find jobs, helping to create work opportunities. So I think, and then the day supports in the way of meaningful day programs.
Absolutely. Thank you. You know, and the reason why I asked was when as you went through your strategic thinking and the different things, the areas of focus, and thinking about workforce and thinking about partnerships and thinking about all kinds of different stakeholders, right? But what occurs to me too is that, so again, on one hand, we're talking about supporting the family, and I know that that is something you want to do, but there are other goals you have as well, and one, of course, absolutely, the ultimate goal is to support the person that you're serving. But to do that, you have to think of your staff. And I know we're going to get to that a little bit later, but this is something of particular interest to me, is how can agencies better support their staff to in their relationships with family, but then also better support families in their relationships with staff, so that the person is better able, supported better, right, ultimately. And because I know that those relationships can become difficult, and for everyone to navigate. So families can they have a lot of information to share and experience. So yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, I'm going to move on. So what have you learned from families in the work that you've done?
We never
just
stop
working
learning.
with families, in relationship with families, yeah.
Yeah, we actually never stop learning, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we often go back and talk to people about, and I'm not sure everyone thinks about this, but families have taught us that there is kind of a bell curve. If you like the bell curve concept or not, we certainly think it exists in working with families. What many providers find is that are really, really tough to work with families, and there are some, and there are really easy, fun families to work with. Those two groups from one end to the other take about 20% of the families, the people that we support with their families. So about 20% of the families we work with fall in one of those two categories. But that we also find that they take up about 80% of our time. And the reason they take up 80% of our time is those really tough families we're trying to always either hide because we don't know how to deal with it. We're trying to problem solve and aren't very successful, and they're exhausting. I'm sure we're exhausting for them too. So then you have the families at the other end that I'll sit around the coffee table and have a coffee with you all day long because you make me feel good. You're fun to be with. You make me feel successful. Even if, in spite of anything I do, I still feel like I'm successful because you're so easy to work with. So what families have taught us is we got to change that. 80% of the time needs to be spent on that middle 80% of the families that are kind of just hanging there waiting for something, waiting for relationships, having to do it on their own. So we've learned that, and we're trying to consciously really flip that bell curve a bit.
Thank you for being so honest.
Sorry.
And sharing that.
Whoops. Yeah, well, got to be honest here.
Yeah.
Families have usually been around the person a lot longer than any of us have. That's another thing that they have taught us, is that they know the person with disabilities in ways that we likely never will. We can't say we don't learn a lot about the person, and if I'm good at what I do, I learn them very well, but families have things that I will never see or have learned. They often know their dreams and nightmares along with their own, with the family's dreams and nightmares, and so that's a part of that person. It's a whole person, not just a day program, not just a job. Families, and I think we both said this earlier, about they bring potential resources they don't even know about. Sometimes we were in meetings and they talk about Joe the grocer that they would never include in their son's or daughter's life. But as we're talking, find out, Joe the grocer has this part-time gig that he's looking for somebody to help, end of story, as you keep going around to where, maybe it's a potential for a job, or for that we were at a meeting where the young woman next door would sneak over to the lady's house next door when she was baking bread, because she eventually taught her how to bake bread. Well, bring her into the team. Let the family have some support in that. So, and then the other is just families will likely be around a whole lot longer than most of the staff that are attached to their son or daughter or sibling. So that's some of the basics that families have taught us.
Well, then let me ask you this: what are some of the things you've done with families, and what's worked, what hasn't worked, and
Okay. A lot of those. I'm going to touch on a few. Some are, as I have to start it with, trial and error. Some we didn't do so hot, but we certainly have learned. And one of the big things is if many families that have been around for service system for a long time are very aware of us saying, well, we're person-centered. We have to get to know the person. We have to listen to your son or daughter where, you don't count so much. It's what John wants or Sammy wants or Debbie. So we did a really good job, I think, of training staff to be person-centered in the way they think. What we now have to do is step back about 30, 40 years and say, oh, that person is part of a family for the most part. So how do we help staff balance? You can be person-centered, but you have to be family-focused also and family supportive. And so how do we teach both the relationship building with person-centeredness balanced with, as the family, what part of this is important to you? What are your dreams and nightmares? Where are your stressors? Where are the things we can help? Never letting go of the person-centeredness, but helping to build that balance. So that's been a lot of trial, a lot of error, but we're still working on it. So we're moving forward. We have done things, and you see this little arrow up there. Parent Think Team we're very proud of. When we talk about the families that make up 20% of what takes up 80% of our time. The Parent Think Team was actually established partly on that. We had some families that were so fabulous and resource rich, but very difficult for us to ever form that partnership. They were tough, and vocal and just never sure if we were quite reaching what we needed to in relationship building. So we pulled together this Parent Think Team that I can't say all the members that were invited were tough families, but they certainly were families that kept us on our toes. And the reason we did it is because we thought we're, just what I said, we're missing some critical information here. We're missing the boat. So we pulled this group together, and it has been one of the most fun, productive, and valuable processes we've ever done. These families have helped us refine our rights and responsibilities manuals. They have helped us deal with some of these issues of staff shortages. What do we do? They have offered to come in and be trainers and mentors for other families. The value they have added to Seek has just been phenomenal. Very proud of that. Also, we look at the pandemic in particular, website, you can go on our website and I think anyone can go on. Our staff have stepped up so much and early on said, you know what, if we can't see people face to face, let's see what all we can create. We have curriculum ideas up there for teaching new skills. We hosted a talent show with staff and the people we support. And now as we get ready to host another one, some families ask if they could be a part of that talent show also. It was such a cool big hit. We have cooking classes that we have. We just had a Taco Tuesday. One of the operations managers on Friday sends out the recipe for Tuesday. Everybody can go out and get their ingredients, and then they all get online on Teams or Zoom and cook together and eat together, and exercise classes. I mean, I know a lot of agencies are doing those things. We're just, we're trying to make it reachable to everybody that can use it and trying to get better at it all the time. We also, and this is another one with trial and error, that we're getting better at it all the time. But usually, most of us in any kind of profession have this hierarchy of supervisory. If you're under me, then I supervise you. And we're really trying to move away from that concept because we have people out there that we have to trust to make their own decisions, to know how to work with families and the people we support and decide at that time what's best. So we're taking more of a coaching mentality, which is not what time are you there, where's your schedule, where's all that, but more of a let's talk this through together, or let me watch how you're doing this, let me show you, let me mentor, and it's going to be a slow turn, but it's a real exciting way because we figure it's not just coaching the direct support staff, it's coaching each other, the family, the person we support. So,
yeah, absolutely. How can you talk a moment about how your executive director speaks? I believe is it on a weekly basis?
Yes,
With families.
She has 2 or 3 times a week where it's an open call for staff. So any staff member can call in, and then every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, she has an open call for any families that want to get on. And I think and then if she can't do it, I get the honor of taking that call. So I love the weeks that she can't do it. But I think we started out, with probably 4 families showing up on this call, and now they're probably 20 to 30 every Wednesday that come on, and they can ask questions. We tell them what's going on with the pandemic. We tell them what's going on and how we're trying to be a support to people, ask questions. It's been a great sort of side thing or additional thing to do to reach out to families.
And Cindi, to me, what that speaks to, the fact that initially there were a handful of folks and now you're up to 30, it speaks to the issue, and we see it in many different ways in the disability field, where things weren't available to folks, and so folks never even asked. So,
right.
Historically, families aren't speaking directly to the executive director or someone in executive leadership, but it doesn't mean that it's not needed or that they don't want to, because now as it's taking place and folks are hearing about it, my gosh, it's the old build it and they will come, and folks are there. So it really speaks to the need for its purpose, and yeah, I think that's wonderful. Yeah,
it has been great, and it's one way we found out. If we go back to the website activities, it's how we found out that, well, we've been trying to get on and it's not letting us in. So then we were able to go in. One, we're still trying to correct some of the catches, but in one family situation, we found out their internet was just too weak. So we helped them kind of get the equipment that they needed to be able to have their family connect. I do want to mention, if you see the pre-PCP planning, we're very big proponents at SEEK of the life course framework, and have built a profile and vision or trajectory, but a one-page profile that really looks at the vision of planning for the good life, as Marianne talks about. That is built in as a formal part of our person-centered planning process. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that tomorrow we're actually starting a 6-series training that is side-by-side learning with a family member and the person we support as they think about moving out. So we incorporate the life course framework into the pre-planning, and then we have several sessions we've developed a moving out guide. We're piloting it thanks to the ARC of Maryland with a grant. This is a pilot, so it's only SEEK families, about 10 SEEK families, and we switched from all in-person side-by-side learning to all virtual now, which has been an interesting challenge. But we will let you know as this pilot rolls out. It's something that we would see taking across Maryland.
This is wonderful, Cindi. I just congratulations, and to me it represents hope. You spoke to earlier that hope for what can be, and I know there's trial and error and what have you, but it looks like you clearly SEEK is moving in a wonderful direction to better support families. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
I hope so. Thank you.
I know. Well, tell us. So we've got 15 minutes. We want to leave at least 5 minutes for some questions. So let's talk about, if you can for a moment, the lessons learned.
Okay. Yeah, and I can zip through these, but I think they're critical.
Yeah, no, we've got 5 minutes. We've got 5 minutes to get through these. Okay, go ahead.
With involved families, years ago, I think Marianne mentioned when she introduced me that I was vice president of accreditation at CQL, or the Council on Quality and Leadership. And this is a very database driven or data driven organization. And one of the things we learned when I first got there was that we know the data shows that if, as long as family is involved with a person, there is a great increase in their health and safety over their lifespan. We have to nurture that. So that's a lesson that we can never forget. It doesn't matter how dedicated staff are. If staff go and come in and out of someone's life, they are not the constant. Involved family makes a difference. And family, as you defined it, Marianne, it doesn't have to be mom or dad. It can be whatever's family for that person. We also know, and this lesson will never go away, there are no magic answers. We're not looking for magic answers. We're looking for evidence that this is better than it was before. We also have learned that partnering with families is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do now. And in the future, I don't think we can do without it. In hindsight, it all seems like common sense. But that's the story of our lives in many cases. Oh, I wish I knew then what I know now. Right. We don't want to lose that. If it's done well, partnerships will increase our successes with all of Maryland's people with disabilities and their families. And don't be afraid to make mistakes and learn together. I mean, we've embraced, and it's one of the things I get excited about with SEEK. We try to help staff, what we call Debbie Fisher. Some people may know her, but she and I did a presentation years ago that I do all the time now, and it's called a reset. Supporting people, staff, everyone to make mistakes, but to learn from those mistakes and how to build on those as new opportunities. So we do try to celebrate the mistakes we made. We don't try to pretend that we never make them. Oh, and families are real good about telling us that when we have. Sorry.
Well, and the other thing about this, you begin to build trust. And I think as a family member myself, and Meg's moving out, and now she's going to be supported by whomever, being able to trust folks, but because there's often so much fear and a whole host of other things, just letting go in itself is difficult. And we often think that the provider, whomever the professional is, should know and do everything correctly. And because there's so much fear, we just want our family member to be safe and cared for well. But if we can develop these relationships and build trust between one another, these mistakes, of course, they're going to happen. It's a given. We made mistakes, but we don't want the mistakes to get in the way, right? We want to learn from them and allow them to help our bond grow even stronger. And I just think it's tremendous that you've identified it and you're really working towards doing this. What would you? So, given all that you've just said, what do you want to? Oh, I moved too far. I'm sorry. Nope, I didn't. I apologize.
Oh, you got it.
What can families do? What would you suggest families could do to build partnerships with their provider that's supporting their family member?
A couple things came to mind with that. I think I could go on, and I don't usually put so many notes on a slide, but I thought that I just wanted to leave this for people to look at a bit. There are probably 20 things that families could tell us would help also, but one of the things that we've learned is we really ask families, communicate with your DSPs, communicate with them as professionals providing a service, and that could be by communication logs, sending texts back and forth, just checking in with each other, and remembering that it's not a bad thing, but that sometimes DSPs feel they have to make best friends with families, and helping them to understand we have a business relationship. If you happen to love each other and become good friends, that's okay. But the reality is this is a service and a support that they're providing, and keeping in mind that they are professionals, but talk to them, communicate with them. At the same time, we know a very difficult challenge for families is that DSP often, or direct support worker, is the person that you know. If you don't know the manager, you wouldn't think, or their supervisor, you wouldn't think to take supervisory things to that person. And so what happens and complicates things for families and the direct support workers sometimes is in that sort of supervisory relationship. If it feels like it's a supervisory complaint, constructive something wonderful happened, make sure you get to know that manager so you can have that same comfort of communication. So that way we can be a better support to the DSP in your home. Consider what partnership means to you. You know, I can do all the best support and training to a direct support worker in the world, but if that doesn't mean a partner to you as the family and to the person in your family they're supporting, it's probably not going to work so well. So how does this idea of working together, how do we solve things together? Help that DSP get it. You know, even if it's positive information, we need to hear that too. Or if it's negative, how do you form that partnership? Okay. Use planning tools. I can't be a cheerleader enough for charting the life course for family or the life course framework tools. We're trying to incorporate them more and more. We're creating tools. Like I said, we've just created a moving out guide. I hope it works. We think it will. But there are tools. Ask your direct support workers to help you find them if you don't have the ability to find them yourselves. But when people hand you tools for creating a vision about your life or about what's important to you or help you look at the lifespan across your family, tap those tools, use them. And as I said, like the life course framework tools. So those are the 4 that come to mind right away.
Sure. And I do know, knowing you, I know there are so many more, but I want to thank you for your sage advice here, and thank you for all the information you've shared today. And again, I know there is so much more, and we could talk about this for days. Yes. But that said, we do want to wrap things up. And with that, I want to provide folks with an opportunity to ask questions. So here are some guidelines. You can submit a question. We'd like to take questions related to this webinar today. You can do that through your chat or question box. If you have questions related to services and supports, please contact your DDA local regional office. They want to hear from you and want to help you. If you've got questions specific to Appendix K, you can please submit those questions to the email site there shown on the screen. So with that, we have Erin, wonderful Erin, who will read the questions. Do we have any questions, Erin?
Hey, yes. Hi, everyone. We do have some questions and comments. First, there is a lot of appreciation for the discussion today, and I wanted to share that with all of you. Folks are asking if this will be on the website. It will be archived along with all of the other DDA all of the other webinars in this series on the DDA website. You can also just download the PowerPoint in the handout section here. If you're having any trouble with that, it is always sent out following the webinar as well, so you'll be able to get it there. There was a preliminary question pretty early on, just asking if you could say a little bit more about the charting the life course framework. You know, how can folks find it? How do they use it?
Sure. Well, there are a couple of things. First, we, in the attachments that will go out today with the handouts, we will include it's called Charting Life Course 101. So that provides you the description of the basic principles and tools. We will also be sending out a trajectory and the integrated star. Now, that may not help you a whole lot. What I would then recommend that you do is going to lifecoursetools.com, and that, so there's the National Community Practice for Supporting Families, of which Charting the Life Course informs all of that work, and they are inextricably connected. But you'll go to that site under resources. You have access to all of the tools and the principles and instruction around how to use these tools and principals. Also, what I'm thinking, Cindy, as you were talking, and the profile, now the profile originally was developed by National, but Seek has modified it, and you've done it in a lovely way, which really assists the work that you do. And I'm wondering if maybe we could share that. Donna, we'll get it from Cindy at a later time and then send it out to all the folks who participated in the webinar today. And also, you can contact me at my email, mary.kane-bresci@maryland.gov as well. I'm happy to talk to anyone about charting Life Course Framework.
That's great. I do want to say there's a couple of individual questions about people's personal situations. We're going to get those to the right people. We don't want to share private information out, but we also want you to know they're not going to a black hole. We will take them, we see them, we'll get them to the right people. You should expect to get a response back on those. Cindi, there's a question for you. You know, one of the Life Course tools and principles is this idea of integrated supports, but not everything is about eligibility specific supports. And the question is, you know, what are some innovative ways to find funding for things that are not part of a traditional state service?
As far as a provider goes, we're always looking at grants or foundations or, you know, people that our board members help us meet, or again, families. Often families have said that they're connected to somebody that does something totally unrelated, but as we talk, we find out they're really not. And so there might be little seed money projects. We also, as again, a provider agency, look at donations and our events, always adding to. And are there different things that services that we can bill for outside of the system? Is there expertise that we have that has developed that isn't specific to developmental disabilities, or that can be sought after and purchased? Mary Ann, you could probably add more because you're going to add a resource list too. And I don't know if you have further ideas.
I was afraid you were going to hand that back to me.
Well,
no.
I wasn't sure if the question was specific to finding additional resources for families or finding them as a provider. As a provider, we probably have more open options.
And what I don't know about the question, what are they seeking funding for? Because there are different pots of money out there, and there are different ways to access funding, but then there isn't, right? And then if the support or whatever else it is that they might be thinking about, what I was thinking about, and getting back to families and the resources that families can tap into very naturally, and families often are able to bring that to the table. So I would need more. I would need to know more about the question, specifically what they're asking for. Yeah. And then we are going to get to resources, but let's take one last question, I guess. Is there one more, Erin?
There are. You know, there are some questions that speak to some of the natural tension that could happen between people with disabilities and their families. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about negotiating that balance.
Negotiating that balance is a very difficult thing. We actually have some ethics discussions at times, and I would like to see that open up to be a more purposeful kind of process, because we believe that if you remember a couple minutes ago, I mentioned about we did a really good job of training our direct support workers on, you need to be person-centered, you need to get to know the person, and I will never go back on that. I think that's a critical component of doing our business well. What we didn't do a good job of is exactly what you're asking, that negotiating. While I'm person-centered, how do I negotiate and support other relationships that are critical to that person's life? And so, you know, Joe, the person with disabilities, is 30 years old and says, man, I want to date and I want to get married. And mom's standing there, or whomever in the family is saying, over my dead body, it's not going to happen. So do I judge good or bad? No, my job is to help the direct support worker. How do you support both? Well, is to be able to talk about it freely and problem solve together. Not, sorry, my job is to support Joe. He wants to date. I'm going to let him date. That's not what we are going to be successful with. So the how, it evolves depending on the situation. It certainly starts with how do we problem solve together and be honest and open. Marianne mentioned that before. The transparency is so important.
And really being able to create that safe space for the person. You know, nothing's worse for the person than to have mom and staff at odds with one another, right? But we want to create a safe space for staff, and we want to be able to create a safe space for families to be honest and to have those conversations. And I'm going to use that as a segue. And I know we're at the end of time, but I want to go to the resource section. And what's interesting about this section, unlike the other webinars, we really had, there were so many there were so many resources, we didn't have space. Interestingly enough, you know, it was very difficult to identify resources in the community around this topic, building partnerships between families and providers of people with developmental disabilities. But I think it really speaks to the issue, and that this is new. You know, our community, our society has really evolved in its understanding of how best to support people with disabilities and the role that families play. It's an opportunity to build. And so here, we've listed under eligibility specific, one of the resources, always the provider, whether that's MSDE, DDA, or medical provider, they're a resource, and you go to them. In terms of community-based Charting Life Course Framework, I can't tell you, I just couldn't identify much around building partnerships. Now, that said, there was a lot around building partnerships between families and educators. So there really is an emphasis early in life, and we recognize the young child and the role that family plays in that, but we don't recognize as a community the role that the family plays with an adult child. So I just think that's interesting. And what I think what we really got going for us are our personal strengths and assets. And we don't pay enough credit. We don't give ourselves enough credit. You know, our ability to trust, our own self-knowledge, and all of these things, we can bring this to the table, and as can the provider. And when we bring this together, we can figure this out. I mean, we really can figure this out, and it serves us all well. So with that, I'm going to end because it's 1:02. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. I really want to thank Cindi. I am just so grateful for all that you shared with us and taking the time to do so. I want to thank, I also want to extend an invitation for everyone to join us on August 19th. Our topic will be on reopening. Our special guest will be Nicholas Burton out of our DDA. He's the Central Regional, Maryland, the Central Region Director with DDA. I want to thank our Deputy Secretary, Bernie Simons, for providing us with the opportunity to host these webinar series. I hope you all remain well and cool. It's so daggone hot out there, but take care and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Cindi. Bye-bye. Thank you, Erin, for your help, and Donna, too. Thank you.